G'day, I'm Madeline Galea.
And I'm Scott Sanders.
Welcome to The One Thing, a podcast designed to give you one solid practical tip for gospel-centred ministry each week.
Now, we're kind of doing this sort of look back in time. I feel like we need to sort of music montage sort of thing. Yesterday in staff team, we did like what was your best year of life?
Oh, yes.
And you picked New Zealand.
I did.
With the Hillstons.
Yep.
In the first year of their church plant.
Mm-hmm. Shall I elaborate?
You shall, yeah.
No, it was a great year. It was very purposeful. It was a great thing to be over there, helping them as they started Auckland EV. But I also just had some good friends, and we had so much fun. I said I've never had so much consecutive fun every weekend for a year. Highly recommend. I was 19 as well. That helps.
19.
19.
Such a long time ago.
How long ago? No.
Now, The One Thing's brought to you thanks to Geneva Push, the Australian Church Planting Network, and you've pressed play on 10 years ago. I planted a church. Now, we've got Toby Neal here today. Welcome, Toby.
G'day.
Hello, you are the lead pastor of Vine Church.
That's right.
You studied at Moore College.
Yep.
I just heard that you were an accountant, so I don't mean to laugh when I said it. No, I think that's great. That's good.
My wife doesn't know what's worse to tell people, that I'm a pastor or an accountant in kind of like a secular city. But
fair enough.
There we go.
There you go. We're going to talk a bit about the last 10 years of Vine Church. So Can you give us a bit of a history of Vine?
Yeah, well, originally wanted to be a missionary to an overseas country. When I was 19, I was on a surf trip to Samoa, and my dad was quite worried about my safety, and he said something to me which challenged me. He said, "Why are you risking your life doing something that's ultimately pointless when you could risk your life telling people about Jesus?"
Wow.
And so started devouring missionary biographies, wanted to be a missionary in a place where I would risk my life, the Middle East, but realised that wasn't going to work for me or my family, and then started thinking about, does Sydney need missionaries? And of course, and church planting is a great way to be on mission. So we started 10 years ago with 16 friends in our lounge room. We moved to a pub, and we had these dreams of being a pub church, and then one of the kids cut themselves on some broken glass on the floor, and we're like, this ain't working. And we moved into a library and spent a couple of years there, outgrew that, moved into a school hall, outgrew that, needed to plan a second service, couldn't, and then it was at that time that the Anglican church in Surry Hills, the pastor moved on, very godly man, but they were quite small in number of people but had a lot of property, and we were growing with lots of people but no place to meet, and so it was a great match.
Yeah.
It's interesting hearing you tell that, because it sounds a lot of buildings, property, but is that the challenge of an inner city or city planter, that you're always struggling for building space? Why not talk about people and the people growth and the numbers of people coming?
Partly because that was the question that was written on the form, but it is a big challenge. I think probably anywhere when you have your own space, you're always at the whim of. And actually, before we planted, so we were doing a couple of monthly meetings in the library, and when that happened, this newspaper reporter did a hit piece on us and tried to get us kicked out of all the public spaces.
Page 3 of the Telegraph.
Page 3 of the Telegraph. So, property was a big issue for us, and to buy our own property in the inner city was never going to happen.
So the second gathering, when did that, what timing-wise, was that at the 6-year mark, the 5-year mark?
Well, it should have been at the 4-year mark, and or even earlier, but we couldn't do it anywhere, so we kept holding off. And then when we merged with St Michael's, they had a morning congregation, and we didn't flood it with people when we merged, because we didn't want to kind of overwhelm them and their identity, and so we sent a couple of our people along and slowly grew that, and so that was the second.
And the third gatherings happened sort of post-COVID?
Similar. We should have started our third gathering much sooner, But the excuse for doing it was COVID's meant, capacity in the building, so we had to. But really, we should have started that sooner.
So present day, how many people are at your services, conversions over the years, baptisms?
Yeah.
Sorry, threw that one in.
Parish council member.
Favourite parish council? Clearly not you. But we're about 220, 230 people on a Sunday at the moment, which by God's grace is just a bit more than we had this time last year. So COVID, it hit us in the middle of the year, but we've come out of it very strong. And part of that is we've started a third service. That's been a growth dynamic for us already. So that's good. Conversions, I have always found it hard to count conversions, and that's because I don't want to count a false conversion. And, I always see, church planners say, this many people converted. I'm like, how do you know they're genuinely converted? Because I want to know, are they in church loving Jesus 5 years later after hard times have hit? And that's a bit harder to kind of calculate. This year we have made a decision to start counting it, but we ask people who, saying they've made a decision to start following Jesus, and we give them some kind of criteria based on, have you repented of sin and trusted in. So we've done that now. So I can't give you an answer to how many conversions.
Yeah.
We've seen, over 100, probably close to 200 people go through Christianity Explored. So that's exciting.
Great.
How many was that? Over 200?
Yeah.
Yeah, so generally...
Maybe not. See, I'm terrible with numbers.
But just times that by...
You're an accountant.
Yeah. Times that by 0.25, so 50 people most likely have made first-time decisions. It is like... That would be the most joyful part I would have thought of planting a church. But your reticence at putting the number down there also probably has the most challenging part. You see someone make a declaration of faith, you see them make changes, and then you see them walk away.
Yeah.
Or you see someone on your core team who's invested deeply growing, and then something happens and they walk away.
Yeah.
So let's not go into the pain first. Let's go into the joy. What's been the most joyful part?
The joy will be seeing them side by side in heaven.
Yeah, good.
And I never know what's going to happen with them in life. So I'm always which makes, as a pastor, you're always working hard, not just for their decision, but for their growth in godliness. So what have been the joyful things? Milestones. So to be honest, we merged with St. Michael's, and for the first time in decades, the church has been full, absolutely full to the brink. That's been a great joy. I love running Christianity Explored and seeing people converted and the lights going on, particularly when you're talking about the grace of God. I love seeing people, coming from different church backgrounds that don't take the Bible so seriously, and then they come here and they're like, finally, deep biblical teaching that's applied to life. So I love that. Maybe this sounds weird, but probably my highlight has been the very first visitor of our church was a girl called Rebecca Guillaume, and she, 2 weeks after visiting our church, they found cancer. She went into hospital rush with, stomach pains, and they found cancer. And we had this decision. She's only just visited. She was our first visitor. She'd come once. Do we visit her in hospital? And my wife and I made the decision, let's be the church that visits people we hardly know in hospital. And that started a wonderful friendship. And she died last year, but to be honest, helping her prepare for death and the example she set to me and the rest of the church, that's by far the highlight. She died, she's with the Lord, and she was prepared for that because of what we did as a church. So.
Yeah, I'm not from Vine, and I have friends who aren't even from Vine, and they all heard about that story, and it was talked about just how, it was a beautiful story. Yeah. What has the joyful things, but what have been the harder things?
Yeah, I think probably the hardest thing is coming up against your sin and your incompetency and not being able to change, and realising that those things are holding back the growth of the gospel in the church, and working on it, working on those things, but not finding answers to, I guess, the things, what is it about my leaderships that's making our, creating blockages in our church right now, and not being able to solve those issues. For me, that's been the hardest, most tiring thing about church planning. What I've learned about myself this year is that I really don't. I go nuts when people are criticising me for doing the right thing, and often you're leading the church in a direction, and it's hard, and you're making difficult decisions which are costing you, but it's the right thing to do.
I get the sense just from hearing you talk about those hard things, you have a great responsibility, a great burden for the whole church. Is that something that has grown over the last 10 years? Is that something you feel even more now that you're a church of 230, as opposed to being a church of 16? Or is that something you just always felt? In some sense, that's what makes you a good church planner. That's what makes you a good sort of driver to get things started.
Yeah, I guess maybe, this is getting very psychoanalytic. Sorry. I think I always felt a little, growing up in church, maybe that, no one really cared about me in the church. So, that's one of my values, going to church, that everyone needs to know that people care about them here, and that we're on about not just growing a church, but growing individuals into maturity in Christ and having a supportive community around them. Yeah. So, I'm that's the kind of church I want to be a part of.
Yeah. It's a core value. Yeah, that's good.
What's been the biggest difference between the first 5 and the second 5 years?
Yeah, great question. So lots of differences kind of in, I guess, how the church operates, but I'll probably best just to talk about the differences for me. So first 5 years, you got a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of optimism, everything's new, and if you're an entrepreneur, you like starting new things. Second 5 years, the opposite. It's like you usually hit a growth barrier, so you're less optimistic. You're like, how do I get through this? And you try one thing, can't get through it. Try another thing, can't get through it. Try another thing, can't get through it. And you just become, so your optimism turns to cynicism. You stop having the energy you once had because you've gone through conflict. The things you had hoped haven't arrived. So your energy, and maybe you're a little bit older, so you don't have the energy of a 29-year-old. And you stop starting new things, and the goal is you just got to start building out the systems, procedures, policies to maintain what's here and to grow up organisationally. First 5 years, you're like this young teenager. You don't know whether you're going to be staying the night at your house or your friend's house, but it's like your New Zealand trip, right? And then you grow up, and it's sort of like you got bills to pay, you got risk to manage, you've got staff, all of this stuff. So I found that very hard. Like, the difference is it's just way less fun.
And if you're entrepreneurial, you're wired to the beginning, starting up, not so much the managing 10 years down the track. And
I think if you do grow to the point where you start having staff, and maybe even if you don't have staff, you start giving away all the face-to-face ministry to the point where you're almost not doing any face-to-face frontline ministry. So for me, my job is to preach, to lead the staff team and the parish council, and to cast vision. And as a result, like, all my people ministry, all that, like, I care deeply about people, but I'm not doing hardly any of that now. So you give all that away, and for me now, my job's to enable my staff to be doing that and to see them doing that. But so I think that's a big difference.
Now, I remember you at the start when you were planning a church, you were at every conference. You read every book. You had Evernote notes on everything. Every conversation was, table. Now, I think you still do that, so there's nothing that hasn't changed. But what do you wish you had known 10 years ago?
I wish the leadership pipeline stuff was in place, to be honest. That would have saved us. There's a little plug for ministry group. You haven't paid me for this, but no, seriously, the leadership pipeline stuff's so important, and we didn't start with that in our DNA. Wish I had have known that. One of the other... this is all difficulties. Feels like the counselling couch.
But no, this is good. I think this is really helpful for the person who's listening in to go, it's hard work.
One of the hard things about our area is just the transients. I wasn't prepared for that. So I thought, I grew up at Christchurch Gladesville, and there were people there that have been there for 40 years, 50 years. Lots of people have been there 20 years. And that's what I'm expecting. I'm starting a church where that's the culture of the place. People there long-term partnering with you in reaching the area. And that hasn't been our experience. People turn over every 3 years. It's huge because people move into the area, then they move out of the area. And that is so hard because I want this community where people care for each other, and they're here and I pour my life into them, and then they leave. So I wish I'd known that, Toby, you could have foreseen this. That is the area. Unless they grew up in the area, and unless they've got a job where they can afford to stay in the area, you ought not to expect them to be.
You're going to be saying you're going to be saying goodbye. But then there's incredible opportunity there. Yeah. You can invest in someone for 2 or 3 years, send them on to another church. Yeah. With that DNA of being gospel generous and mature.
Yeah. And they've come into the area, and often they've come from churches that don't teach the Bible well, and so we have this great gift of reforming them in their faith and then sending them back out, hoping they'll go back to a Bible teaching church. John Stott says the key question facing the church today is whether we will allow Jesus to command us or whether we will command him to do what we want him to do. And when we started Vine Church, we caught up with another church planter who had planted a couple of years ago in the area, and he said to me, Toby, you are not going to grow this church if you're Reformed, complementarian, and you do a Bible monologue every Sunday. You will not grow a church here if you do that. And we said, look, Jesus is the lead pastor of this church. We're going to hear from him, and if he tells us that he's in control and that this is the way he wants men and women to relate, and that he wants his word to be taught, not just discussed, we're going to do that. And, his church is folded, but God's sought to bless ours. So I think that was the right thing.
Yeah.
You've pushed into a little bit the sort of awareness that, hey, I might not be the person who can lead the church for the next, kind of this next season. You push up against those growth barriers. You've got to change. Yeah. Have you asked yourself that question? Hey, I'm not this person, and I need to hand it over to someone else. And what would your counsel be to someone who's sitting there listening and they're 10 years in and they're going, yeah, we've got it to this size, and hey, I just want to go plant another church, or hey, I want to go and I need to rest, or
I asked that question, and we're about to do a building development, so I'm not at all considering that question. The church needs me right now. But when we finish the building development, get a year into that, I think I need to ask a serious question. Should I stay here or should I leave? I mean, my plan from the beginning was stay here for my whole ministry life. But I need to ask the key leaders in the church, do you think I'm the right guy to lead this church to the next level? And actually, I'm always aware of myself, my own limitations, and my own insecurities are, I don't think you can, lead it to the next level. But I wouldn't run away from that because, I think you've got to, most of the larger churches in Australia, the pastor's been there for a long time, and they just stick it out. Yep. And I think, I think the first 10 years have been, I found them hard, and hopefully the next 10 won't be, but even if they are, I mean, there hasn't been a Bible, a large, vibrant, inner city, Surry Hills Bible teaching ministry like this for decades and decades. And we've stuck it out 10 years, and we haven't achieved what I had hoped, but we have achieved something others haven't. And so I probably need to stick it out. I need to be careful about my desire to run from the challenge. And yes, maybe I don't have the skills right now, but maybe I can learn them, and maybe it'll take more time than I wish it would take to learn that. But yeah, and then I think it's getting other people's wisdom on that.
And this is a powerful thing, because I can still remember 10 years ago, you didn't want to get assessed. Well, yeah, you didn't want to get assessed because the answer could have been no.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
And you really wanted to plant a church. Like, you know, you had the prospectus with all the dark images of the pub and going to third spaces. I can still remember that. But I think it's a really helpful thing to keep asking in leadership.
Yeah.
Because the answer, you know, often will be yes. But then the answer to the question is, what do I need to do to change? And pressing into that and pushing into that, which is the leadership pipeline stuff. Yeah.
Which every leader faces wherever they're at.
That's it.
So this is helpful. Like, no leader ever comes to a point where, like, yeah, I'm competent for this. Like, I think every leader that's facing, all leaders feel, I'm not competent for this. And the mark of a great leader is they keep working on it. So I think that's my advice to someone who's 10 years, should I leave? You know, you just got to be careful you're not running away from the opportunity to keep learning. Yeah. But it may be the right thing to do, because and that's where I think others.
Yeah, wise counsel. That's really good advice.
What's the one thing you want to say to someone who's considering planting?
Keep Jesus central. Keep loving him. Stay close to him. Read. You know, there's that great Gentle and Lowly book by Dane Ortland. I started reading that. Our people, that's what they need to hear, that he's worth following, trusting, obeying. And that's what you need to hear. He's worth serving, making the sacrifices to plant. And if you're going into planting for some other reason other than the glory of Jesus, you're going to give up, because it's not going to deliver what you're wanting. The only thing church planting will deliver is more glory to Jesus. And that glory will come through hardship and convert, you know, it'll be the good and the bad. But if Jesus isn't central, it won't be worth it. Yeah. And you won't last the distance. You'll have an affair, you'll burn out, you'll give up. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks Toby. Thanks for leaving your heart out there and letting us kick it all around. It was good fun.
10 years. It's good. What is in the toolbox, Scott?
Well, Toby talked about getting. Well, he didn't talk about getting assessed, but he was assessed by the Geneva Push.
You talked about
I talked about Toby getting assessed. So I talked about it, and I would encourage you guys, if you are thinking about church planting, get assessed. The other thing, talk about having wise counsel. I reckon that's helpful for a leader at any stage, but particularly for the church planter. You know, Toby was sort of voracious in grabbing and thinking and learning. One of the really helpful things to do is to catch up with an older church planting couple and talk to them about your dreams and your fears, and have them encourage you, having those people alongside you. You can check out the Vine Church website. It's in the process of getting updated, so maybe jump on in a month's time, and you can find out all about Vine Church as well. Two books to recommend. We've talked about the leadership pipeline. Read that one in particular. The other one is grab a book on growth barriers. So Toby, like, being aware of those and being aware of them before, you can actually look forward and go, okay, I need to be starting to make these changes and getting ready for it. So grab a book on growth barriers and press into that as well.
And if you liked what you heard today on The One Thing, feel free to rate us or leave us a comment.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of The One Thing. I'm Scott Sanders.
I'm Madeline Galea.
Chat soon.